Now that our classes are getting bigger, we have to talk about the scope of a variable. I'm going to demonstrate this in our next example, where we're going to do an instant credit check, and we're going to approve anyone who makes more than $25,000 and has a credit score of 700 or better. We have a new class here, instant credit check, and we have our main method. So let's go ahead and think about our design. We're going to initialize what we know. We're going to get what we don't know. And we're going to check if the user is qualified. Then we're going to notify the user. So these are the steps that we need to do. So what do we know? Well, we know that the required salary is $25,000. And we know that the required credit score is 700. Okay, what don't we know? Well, we don't know how much their actual salary is or their actual credit score. So we need to figure that part out. Throughout the course, we've been putting everything in the main method, but now we're learning a bit more, and so we're going to do more advanced things like break our task up into different methods. So to get what we don't know, let's create a new method that will get the form data. So let's make this public static, and it won't return anything. We just wanted to get the input. So what this will do is prompt the user and get their information. Let me quickly type that out for us. Even though we have this method and it's getting this information, we have to call it in order for these statements to execute. So from our main method, we're going to make a call to the get form data. Next, we need to check if the user is qualified or not. Now, most of the time when I write a method, I first write where I'm going to call it from, just so that I don't forget. Because just now we wrote this method, and if we wouldn't have remembered to put this here, it would never get executed. So I go ahead and make the call, is user qualified? And then it'll be red to let me know that that doesn't exist, and I fix that by creating it. Now this is going to return a Boolean, and we'll say is user qualified. Now inside of is user qualified, it needs to check to see if they have a qualifying salary and credit score. So we can use an if statement here. Now notice, all of a sudden, these variables are in red, even though we've clearly declared them here as well as here. So why are they in red? That's because variables are only valid within the scope in which they were defined. And by scope, you can think of those also as these curly braces. So the immediate curly braces that a variable was declared in is the limit to where it can be utilized. So this salary and this credit score can only be used inside of the get form data. And this required salary and required credit score can only be used within the scope of main. So in order to use these in various scopes, we have to either pass them to the methods that they need or declare them at a higher scope. Required salary and required credit score can be defined a little bit higher. So instead of declaring them within the main method, we're going to declare them at the class level. So notice now these are between the curly braces of the class itself, meaning they belong to the class and their scope is anything within the class. So every single method in here is able to access these variables. But because these methods are static, we're going to also need to declare these as static as well. And now if we scroll down, we see that this method now knows what required credit score is as well as required salary, but it still doesn't know the actual salary and actual credit score. Now these things are only really relative to this is qualified method. We see where these were defined in this get form data. Now we could possibly pass it from here on to here. However, this is not the method that's calling this method. It's the main method that's calling this method. And the main method does not have access to salary or credit score because it's limited to this scope of get form data. So what we can do is we can return this stuff back to the main method so that the main method could then pass it in to the is qualified method. However, remember, a method can only return one value, and in this case we have 2. That's an indicator that our method is doing too much. So instead of having get form data, we can break this into 2 separate tasks of get salary and get credit score. And now they're going to have to return some information. So get salary is going to return a double. And we're going to take this information and we're going to cut it. We're going to place it inside of there. And then notice we have a little red here. Why? It gives us the error right here. It says it's missing the return statement. So remember, if you specify that you're going to return something, you must do so. So let's just say return salary. And now we want to get the other piece of information, the credit score. This is an int data type that should be returned. And then we can cut this and we can place it inside of here and then return the credit score. Now we have a couple of errors here. This scanner is saying that it cannot resolve this symbol, meaning it doesn't know what it is. Why? Because scanner was defined within this method, so this is out of scope. Since we need the scanner in more than one method, we can make this also global. And now we're able to use it in both methods. Now a method itself never knows who's going to call them and when it's going to call them. So we couldn't take this scanner.close and put it inside of get salary, because if anyone called get salary before they called get credit score, then the scanner would be closed and unable to be used. So we have to leave this up to the main method. The main method is the one that's driving the flow. So it's going to call those methods to get the data, and then we'll have it close the scanner. In this get form data we no longer need, so we'll change that to get salary and then get credit score. So main method is driving the flow. It says I'm going to get the salary, I'm going to get the credit score, and then I'm going to close the scanner. Now, it needs to call this is user qualified, and we still haven't taken care of these 2 variables. So these variables are here and being returned. So when we call this method, it's going to return us some information and we can store it in a variable. So we can say double salary equals get salary. And the data type that gets salary is returning is a double, so we have to declare this as a double as well. If we declared it as anything else, we would get an error saying incompatible types. It's required an int for this variable, however, what's being returned back is a double. So this must match what's being returned from here. Credit score is an int, so we can say int credit score equals. Now that we have those two, we can pass it into is user qualified. However, is user qualified doesn't specify that it has any parameter list. So if we want to have a method specify that data should be given to it, again, we have to put that inside of this parameter list definition. So we say, okay, if you're going to call us, you must pass us a credit score and you must pass us a salary. Now that I've said that, then these are valid. And it's going to essentially take this. This is now a variable declaration, and it's going to use this. And inside of here, we're going to pass it that information. I'm going to collapse this just so you can see this really well. So inside of here, I have to pass what's being called. So it wants the credit score first. So I have to say credit score. And then it wants the salary next. So I have to give it my salary. Now, these variables are not the same as these variables. These are two different memory locations. When a method is making a call to another method, what it's passing is arguments. And the method that's receiving it, this is called parameters. Now they have the same name in this case, but I'm going to change this just to show you that they're not the same. So I'm going to just call this S&C, just for short. This C corresponds to this credit score, meaning whatever value is in C is now being stored inside of credit score. Whatever is inside of S will be stored inside of salary. Now, these are the same because this is now within the same scope. I could not call this sale, for example, because it would then not know what I was talking about. So this variable, salary, is only recognized within this scope. So it doesn't matter what these are called. This argument list maps to this parameter list. Okay, so we have everything nice and declared. Now we can say if this is true, go ahead and return true, because remember this is expecting a Boolean. Else, return false. Now your method is only going to execute one return statement, and it's going to be the first one that it encounters. And since these are in two different branches, this is legal. If I were to put another return statement, let's say return true or something here, this would give us an error. Why? Because I've already taken care of both cases. There's only two possible paths. One of these have to be executed. There's no way that our method would ever even reach here. So this is invalid. So even though our method is returning this Boolean value, we are not required to receive it on the calling end. So having a statement just like this is perfectly fine. However, when we notify the user, let's make our notify user. This notify user method is going to print a statement based on if the user is qualified or not. Well, they won't know this unless we give it the Boolean value that was returned from here. So it makes sense in this case to read it in and then pass it to this method. So we're going to make another method now for the notify. And this one won't return anything. And it should take a Boolean value. We'll call this is qualified. And inside of here, we can say if is qualified, and that's a Boolean, so that's the condition all by itself, then we'll print out, congrats, you've been approved. Otherwise, you've been declined. Okay, so notice in this call, I called this variable qualified, but I called it is qualified, remember, because of the argument and the parameters being two separate variables. Now, because I cleaned that up, I want to put this back because this is driving me crazy to have the S and the C, because remember I told you we don't do that. So I'm going to call this the same thing, and that way I've given you two examples where you can have the same name. It doesn't matter because this is something totally different. So even though we have a variable called salary within the main, we have a totally different variable called salary inside of is user qualified. And it just so happens that they have the same name and we're passing those values into here. So I've given you an example where we're calling a method using the same names. And I've given you an example where we've calling a method using different variable names. Now let's just go ahead and put the debugger on so that we can see how things are happening. Now everything that was defined at the class level will have already been initialized. So we see these three things are initialized. Now, this is going to make a call to get salary. With a debugger, if we want to go inside of the method that's going to be called, we need to use this step into on the debugger as opposed to the step over. So step into will go inside of get salary. Now it's going to ask us for our salary. So we click here and that's going to be on the console. So let's say 35,000. And let's click this. So now we notice that 35,000 has been updated. And now we're going to return this back to the main method. So we returned it to whoever called us. And now it's going to assign that into this salary variable. Notice now salary has been updated. Now we want to get the credit score. So let's step into there. And it's going to ask us for our credit score. Let's say we have an 800. And we say go ahead to the next line. Notice now credit score has been updated to 800. We're going to return that 800 value back to the main method. So now we're in main. So now we see credit score is updated. And we're going to close that scanner. Now, notice this line. We want to call is user qualified. There's three variables here in play. Qualified, credit score, and salary. The only ones that we know values for are credit score and salary because we have not called this method and got the return value back. So let's go inside of there. And we see that we have the information that was passed into here. So it's the same values. And we'll run this, and that says return true. And that'll take us back to the main method. And now notice qualified has been updated. Now we're going to notify the user passing in true. Let's go inside. Is qualified. This will be true. So we're going to print this. Congrats, you've been approved. We're at the end of that, so we go back to the main method. So even though all things were called, it comes back to the main method. The main method, again, is what controls this whole flow. And so the program will end once it reaches the main method. So I'm just going to resume. and we are done. So just to give you some terminology with this, variables that are defined within a method are called local variables. So salary is local variable and it's local to this main method. Same as credit score, same as qualified. This is salary declared within get salary, so this is a local variable. Variables that are not defined within a local scope are called global variables. So these three variables are global to this entire class. So we saw how we can scope a local variable to a method. We could also scope it to any block of code. For example, inside of this if statement, we could create a brand new variable and it will be scoped to this if statement. So just to clarify, a variable is scoped to the immediate braces that it appears within. I have an individual exercise for you. You're going to calculate a cell phone bill. So what you're going to do is allow the user to input the plan fee and the number of overage minutes. And then you're going to charge 25 cents for every minute that they've gone over, and then a 15% tax on the subtotal. I want you to create separate methods to calculate the tax, to calculate the overage fees, and to calculate and print the final total. Please print this as an itemized bill. I have an example of the output expected down below in the example section. Good luck.